All right, now to our top story. The crisis in Egypt continues. U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton just over an hour ago condemning attacks aimed at journalists in the country. The violent clashes between pro and anti-Mubarak forces have many wondering if the country could be spinning out of control. Our first guest sees some parallels between what's happening in Egypt and events that took place in her homeland of Iran. I want to welcome Haleh Esfandiari, director of the Middle East program at Princeton's Woodrow Wilson Center. Esfandiari is also the author of My Prison, My Home, a book about her own captivity in Iran. Professor Esfandiari, welcome to Taking Stock. What can you tell us about reports having to do with journalists as well as human rights activists being imprisoned, being detained in Egypt right now?
Well, what autocratic regime usually do, they go after any group who criticizes them. In this case, the human rights observers and activists, and also journalists who report from the country. I mean, the Vice President of Egypt gave an interview this morning to an Egyptian journalist, blaming foreign TV broadcast on as the cause of one of the uprising, which is ridiculous. They don't want to accept that the people of Egypt have spoken.
What kind of direction or analysis would you give to those that are watching events in Egypt, particularly in the United States? On the one hand, you see at least reports that people have been repressed, people have not been able to exercise any of their political rights, and yet on the other hand, there's concern that we're going to see even greater chaos in the future.
Sure. Look, the army has not yet intervened. I mean, eventually I get a sense that the army, without using any violence, will try and separate the two sides who have been fighting each other since yesterday, supporters of Mubarak and the people who want change. And by change, they mean that Mubarak should leave the country and there should be a quick transition to the rule of law. But these things don't happen easily, you know, so we will see probably more bloodshed, and then eventually the situation will calm down. Whether the president of Egypt will accept to leave soon, I doubt it, because he has been repeating saying that he believes that if he goes, it's going to be a chaotic situation.
What kind of reaction do you have to the U.S. government's statements about how they expect Mubarak to leave now, and that means now?
Look, the U.S. government reached this conclusion systematically and very gradually because they first talked about change and reform. They first talked about reform. Now they are talking about transition.
All right, we're going to talk about that transition. We've got much more on Egypt coming up. You were speaking about the United States, particularly about its relationship with Egypt and its calls for President Mubarak to leave now. Is there any way that the United States and the administration could have gotten ahead of events, or is that unrealistic?
The United States has asked for a transition. They had not specifically said that he should leave now, but we know that there is an emissary in Cairo from the United States, Ambassador Wisner, asking Mubarak to leave now. And we also know that Mubarak had said that he's not going to leave until his term is over, which is September. So now what the United States has to do is to somehow come to some sort of an agreement about the expediting the transition. And that means to make sure that there is a smooth presidential elections, which is going to be very difficult.
Is there any way for the United States and the administration to be viewed as a positive force, at least by the people who are currently demonstrating for the ouster of President Mubarak?
It's too soon to say. It's really too soon to say because, of course, until now we have seen very few anti-American slogans and we haven't seen the anger of the crowd turned over towards the United States. But it depends how long this situation on the street will continue. You know, so far the population has welcomed the strong statements by the administration.
How much should we make of the disposition of the crowds that we see in Egypt, whether they be from working class society or indeed from the business class or even the wealthy? Is this a change in the way that the Arab street is going to be viewed in the future?
What we know about the disposition of the crowd is that it is a very young crowd. This is the generation that grew up under Mubarak. There might be working class, there might be middle class, they might be coming from the, from the farms in the various sort of rural areas, but still it is a young crowd. And this must be very painful for Mubarak to see the children who grew up under his rule are turning against him.
Would you make any comparison to what's happening in Egypt now to events that took place recently in Iran or other areas in the Middle East, whether it be Yemen or Jordan?
I think if we compare it to what happened in 1978 in Iran that led to the overthrow of the monarchy, that opposition had a leader. It was Ayatollah Khomeini. In Egypt, you don't see one leader for these opposition people who are on the street. As for 2009, I think, yes, it was the younger Iranian who were the children of the revolution who came out into the streets. But then the Iranian regime was very brutal and attacked them, arrested them, tortured them. And so the protest movement at least came to an end, maybe temporarily, while the Egyptian army has been very restrained, and has not got involved in arresting, beating, and, torturing people.
Now, you have your own experience of being held in captivity in Iran. With the help of Hillary Clinton and Condoleezza Rice, there was some influence pushed onto the Iranian government to obtain your release. What would you say is the best way for those outside of Egypt now to play a role to perhaps get some of the people who have been detained, whether they are foreign journalists or indeed political opposition forces, how to get them out of detention in Egypt?
Continue talking about them, bring pressure on the government, ask your friends, other governments, the EU, European Union, other Arab countries to request the release of political prisoners, journalists, human rights activists in Egypt. Nothing works more than international pressure.
Are you surprised by the silence coming from many of the other nations in the Middle East, particularly Arab nations, about the uprising that you're seeing in Egypt currently?
Syria, of course, welcomed it. And Iran, which is not part of the Arab Middle East, welcomed also the uprising in Egypt. But I think it was normal and natural for the other countries, Saudi Arabia, the Persian Gulf countries, to just wait and see what is happening, because this will have a ripple effect, and everybody is very worried that they will have a protest movement gaining in the foot in their own countries. We had protests 2 days ago in Jordan. We are having protests in Yemen, in Algeria, and of course Tunisia was the beginning of that whole protest movement. Sure, they are concerned.
All right, I want to thank you very much. Haleh Esfandiari, the head of the Middle Eastern program at the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University.